At Sierra, discover top workout gear at incredible prices, which might lead to another discovery. Your headphones haven't been connected this whole time. Awkward. Discover top brands at unexpectedly low prices. Sierra, let's get moving.
The NBA 82 game grind is done, and now the real fun begins. The NBA playoffs are here, and DraftKings Sportsbook has you covered as an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Make it a playoff run to remember with DraftKings. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code FIELDGOAL. That's code FIELDGOAL for new customers to get $200 in bonus bets when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort in Kansas, 21 and over. Age and eligibility varies by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario. New customers only. Bonus bets expire 168 hours after issuance. For additional terms and responsible gaming resources, see dkng.co/audio.
Hey there, travelers. Kaylee Cuoco here. Sorry to interrupt your music, great artist BT Dubs, but wouldn't you rather be there to hear it live? With Priceline, you can get out of your dreams and into your dream concert. They've got millions of travel deals to get you to that festival, gig, rave, soundbath, or sonic experience you've been dreaming of. Download the Priceline app today, and you can save up to 60% off hotels and up to 50% off flights. So don't just dream about that trip. Book it with Priceline.
Go to your happy price, Priceline.
Hello and welcome to the Paddock and The Pavilion with me, Stephen Wallis, for the latest episode in our What Was It Like 2 series. With the World Professional Snooker Championship just around the corner, I'm joined by former world number 3, Neal Foulds, for a special look back at snooker's golden age. Neal shares vivid memories of the sport's iconic era, when names like Alex Higgins, Steve Davis, Jimmy White and Stephen Hendry weren't just champions, but household names across the UK. We'll relive unforgettable moments from the drama of the 1985 Black Ball final to the player who triumphed on one leg, and hear the story behind Neal's part in a novelty snooker record. Plus, Neal gives us a behind-the-scenes look at life as a snooker commentator and offers his prediction for this year's championship at the Crucible. Hello, Neal. Thank you for joining me on the Paddock and the Pavilion.
No, thank you for having me, Stephen.
What was it like to play in snooker's golden age?
Well, I was young, and I think maybe I didn't appreciate it quite as much then as I should have. I think sometimes when you're young, you don't always understand the magnitude of something you're involved in. I was, rubbing shoulders with sort of elder statesmen who were aware of it all. And I mean, the thing with me is my dad was a snooker professional, and I kind of knew all of these guys from the age of about 12 onwards. And I was just the lad whose dad, Jeff Foulds, was, I used to tag on with him and watch him play in pro-ams, and he latterly turned pro. So I knew all these guys. So, when I first turned professional, I don't know if they took me seriously. They thought, well, there's that lad who, nice lad, but can he play? And then, of course, I got good and joined up with Barry Hearn's team and travelled around the world, So it was the golden age, all right. You go back to, the mid-'80s when there were 3 or 4 TV channels. I'm not even sure whether Channel 4 had only just got going then. So, you were kind of not so much forced to like snooker, but it was there for you if you wanted it all the time on terrestrial TV, wasn't it? So it gained a huge interest.
It certainly did, and it's 40 years since the Black Ball final of 1985, when about 19 million were watching after midnight.
Yeah, and who wasn't one of those? I mean, even if you, like I say, had only a very passing interest in the game, if you've been watching the World Championship for 2.5 weeks, you were not going to miss that Black Ball fight. Can you, thinking back, how can a tournament that lasts so long come down to one ball? It's and really, we should all be grateful that match ever took place and ended in the way it did, because it just created this huge interest in the game. People watching it, as you say, after midnight in their masses.
Where did you watch the match from then? Can you remember?
Well, I played in the championship that year, and Steve had beaten me 10-8 on day one because he was defending champion, and I would have been watching it with my dad, I think. I mean, kind of cheering on Dennis, I suppose, not because I don't like Steve, and Steve is one of my all-time great heroes in the game, actually. I have so much respect for him, but, you know, it was nice to think that there was going to be a new winner who, in the shape of Dennis, and we watched it, and it was just gripping viewing, even for me, who had been in the tournament, you know.
I think you're right. In those days, I'm about the same age as you. Because Steve Davis was winning all the time, people wanted someone to beat him, didn't they?
Yeah, well, isn't that how sport is, especially in this country? And I'm not knocking that, but there've been some great champions in sport. You know, I'll stick to snooker for now, but you know, when Steve and Hendry dominated, it was the same. When Steve was seemingly the only man who played the game to this level, it was almost an occasion when he lost anyway, Steve. He was so dominant that you tend to support the underdog. That's the nature of sport, isn't it?
Going back to you turned professional in 1983, and in your first year you qualified for the final stages of the World Championships, and you played the probably the most famous character of all those years in Alex Hurricane Higgins in the first round of the final stages.
Yeah, I know.
Defending champion as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I played 3 qualifying matches for that, and then I played Alex again. I'd known Alex. It wasn't meeting Alex was not that wasn't anything new to me. I'd been to the Crucible before in 1979 to watch Terry Griffiths play and John Virgo play the year that Terry won it. But yes, I mean, Alex was quite an intimidating figure, but I did know him a little bit, and he knew me. And yes, I didn't. It was a good draw for me, actually, thinking about it on my debut, because I didn't feel under any real pressure. And I remember being 5-4 overnight, and the next morning, the 2 sessions were really close together. It was the evening session, and then back the very next morning, which probably suited me better than Alex, actually, thinking about it. He might not have been up so early. And then I got the job done, beat him 10-9. It was all live. And when you look back on it now, the most interesting thing about that match is that afterwards, the presenter it goes to, and it's of course David Icke. He was the presenter back then for the BBC, and he comes on the screen and says, "What an incredible shot! The unknown Neal Foulds beats the great Alex Higgins." And so there's a lot to unpick from that, really, isn't there?
There certainly is there, isn't there? Just about Higgins, what was it like playing against him? Because I mean, I was a big Higgins fan myself. Yeah. Everyone was on his side, weren't they? They seemed to be.
Well, there were a lot. There was a lot more on his side than mine, put it that way. But I think because I was new, I thought the crowd were very kind to me. They didn't want to. It wasn't when, like the time Alex played Steve at the Masters, where Steve got booed only because he was just a good player. I think because I was a youngster then, I was 20 years of age. I think I had my share of support, but nothing along the lines, of what Alex had. And then, having won that match, I was getting fan mail. Some people were saying, "Oh, you've ruined my championship." Others said, "Well, I didn't really like Alex anyway that much, so well done." And an old lady sent me some money at £5 as a present in a card, but in general, everyone loved Alex except for just the few that didn't take to him. But it was what got me started, to play Alex that year and beat him. And I lost in the next round to Doug Mountjoy, but that one match, when I did lots of exhibition work with Alex after that, I was picking up, this sort of second prize in the exhibition fees, just going around the country playing matches with Alex, really, almost as a spin-off to playing that game.
Could you see for all the smoke in the background?
Well, it's strange because Alex that year commentated for the BBC after I'd beaten him. I've told this story before, but and my next match I'm playing, and Alex is in the commentary box, and all you could see in the commentary box, he was smoking in there. And basically, I can't remember who his co-commentator was, but they were. It was like something out of the Hound of the Baskervilles. Like there's this sort of cloud of smoke, and then of course he'd opened the commentary box door, and all this smoke would plume out, and there was no sort of no smoking regulations then. So it was one thing sitting next to him, but to be in that commentary box with him once he got knocked out, probably was quite damaging to your health.
That sounds like it. Yeah. The other thing I've got to bring up, I've seen this on another video. He beat you once on one leg.
Yeah, he did. No, he did, and that was the other side of it. Really, it was in the Irish Masters, and of course he'd had this thing where he'd fallen out of a window in his house up in Manchester. I mean, I don't know the circumstances as to why he ended up falling out of a window, but I could probably work out a few reasons why it might have happened. But and then he turned up at the Irish Masters with to say a limp doesn't quite cover it. He was almost hopping around, and I lost to him in the Irish Masters, and I thought, wow, I've hit rock bottom here, losing to a man on one leg. And he's getting huge support, of course, over at Goffs in Ireland there. But he went on to win it. He beat Stephen Hendry in the final that year, so I didn't feel quite as bad. Maybe as the week went on, the limp was slightly not as pronounced, but I lost a man on one leg.
Well, you weren't that bad. You got to number 3 in 4 years. Would that be possible these days, or was it easier in those days to do that?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. I think the answer is yes, it's possible, because we don't know what talents are going to come into the game, and the tour is quite open now as far as for a long time players started in the same round and they've got the opportunity to progress quickly. But I think the problem is, even someone who's a really precocious young talent now, it's really difficult to beat these seasoned mid-ranked players day in, day out, the guys that know too much for you. So you'd have to be an exceptional talent now, because the game is definitely harder than it was then. Because when I came through, there were some really good players, like John Parrott I grew up with and all these guys. But there were a few players that were on the downside quite a bit. So some of the early rounds, you mightn't have a very difficult match. You kind of feel as if you could ease your way into a tournament.
Just going back to your first tournament win, the BCE International in 1986, you beat the grinder Cliff Thorburn.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, in the final. I actually had to play my dad in an early round of that event that year, because that was something because my dad was a professional, and that was a kind of an odd match, really. I mean, it's something he'd just beaten Bill Werbenek, so I played my dad, and then I got through to the final, played Cliff, and the ITV events then were over 2 days. It was a 3-session match. There'd be all day Saturday, and then the final session was on the Sunday afternoon, and I got the better of Cliff. Really tough opponent, actually. Not as gifted as your Davis or your Stephen Hendry and players of this ilk, but no more determined an opponent would you ever meet.
You out-grinded him then, did you?
Well, maybe that's what happened. Yeah, I just think that maybe back then, you think about being young and how little you think about stuff. And I would have been early 20s, so just go into it and play. But as the years go by, you develop fears and concerns, don't you, about everything. I think probably, I was quite fearless in those days. Might have helped.
You mentioned a player I was going to ask you about that just a minute ago, Bill Werbenek.
Yeah.
How did he manage to play so well?
Well, I don't know. I mean, with Bill, he was a heavy drinker. I mean, he really was. I mean, when he played in the World Championships, if he played because there weren't many tournaments on, there still aren't actually, where you've got a 10 o'clock start. But the World Championships, a 10 o'clock start meant that Bill had to get up at 6 o'clock, and he had drinks by the side of his bed. He used to drink like a fish, basically. And he couldn't really play sober. And the only downside to that, well, there's a few actually, clearly, because it's not great for your health. But when he used to go take toilet breaks, literally every frame, or sometimes between frames, and he'd be gone an age. So it was quite a difficult task playing Cliff. But he was one of the characters of that era that people remember a lot. Not necessarily for what he achieved on the table, but the kind of person he was, I suppose. Snooker was a bit of a soap opera then, wasn't it?
But thinking back, I think he got in the top 10, I think, didn't he, as a player?
Yeah. Oh, no, he was a good player, for sure. I played my first televised match as a professional against him. But, he was a terrific player. And, of course, in that era, Canada had some great players. And sadly, that part of the world now produces nothing in the way of snooker. Don't know why. Cultural differences and changes, maybe, you know.
Yeah, because we had Kirk Stevens as well, didn't we? And
yeah, Cliff, and there were plenty of others. You know, Alan Robbie in more recent years, but they had there were probably 15 or 20 Canadians who were good players who were over here at the same time. You know, in force.
you must have grown up with Jimmy White. He's about the same age as you.
Yeah, I was 12 when I first met Jimmy when he was 13. I thought I was quite a good player at 12 until I bumped into Jimmy, came into the club in Neasden that I used to go into with my dad, a place called the Ron Gross Snooker Centre. He was a great player in his time. He had a good club, and Jimmy came in there, and I had a few games with him. And I realised I had a long way to go in the game. You know, he was a very gifted player, but he was like the oldest 13-year-old in town. You know, he was, you know, drinking, smoking, having a bet, all these things, playing cards. And I was, you know, just a 12-year-old kid, really, who was kind of looking out to see what the cricket score was at Lord's and all that. You know, I was a bit of an anorak in comparison. So we've been friends for years, but we had very different interests as a young age.
What about the older players? Did you play against even Fred Davis, John Spencer, Ray Reardon?
Well, funny enough, I didn't play against Fred Davis, although by chance I didn't play Fred, because actually a much younger man than me, Ronnie O'Sullivan, played against Fred Davis, would you believe it? At the start of Ronnie's career, he played at the end of Fred's career. John Spencer I never played, although my dad did. I knew John really well, but I didn't. But I did play Ray Reardon a few times. We locked horns. I ended up beating him towards the end of my career, but of course, in the early days, it was almost terrifying playing Ray. It was almost like sort of your headmaster. You know, he was treated with such great respect.
You were a world semi-finalist in 1987,
That's right.
losing to Joe Johnson. Was that the peak of your career, you think?
Well, I suppose, although I dropped out the 16 after that for a couple of years, and then I came back and got back into the top 8 for a few years. I think I was a better player second time around. It's strange, isn't it? I'm working with Joe this week, you know, on the snooker commentary. We work for Eurosport Discovery TNT, and occasionally we have a little chat about that match, you know, how he beat me and all of that sort of stuff. You know, he's one of the good guys in the game, is Joe. But that was, of course, a year after he won it, when he was bidding to win it the second year in a row. So, I don't know. I think I had. Sometimes I think you believe you're a little bit better player a bit further down the line. You know, I had a bit of a sort of a second go at it, if you like, where I got back into the top 8 and had some success, won a few tournaments, but probably not anywhere near as many as others. You know, I'm one of these people that was a good player, but never one of the greats. You know, I'm fully aware of that.
Easy to forget that Joe Johnson made 2 consecutive finals, didn't he?
Yeah, that's right. Well, I mean, we talk about this Crucible curse, which is, for anyone that wouldn't know about that, is for any first-time world champion, no first-time world champions ever won it the next year. And that includes Steve Davis, Stephen Hendry, Ronnie O'Sullivan, John Higgins, and none of these guys have done it. But Joe, at the time, came the closest. You know, he reached the final the next year, and the year he won it, he beat Steve, and the year after, Steve beat him. So he and in later years, Ken Doherty came the closest to actually achieving that again. But Joe was a player who didn't really do a lot else. He won the odd tournament, but he was one of these players that was lit up by playing, you know, in his home county of Yorkshire, you know.
One thing I've got to ask you about, you were part of the Romford Rap, and I've just watched the video with you you were obviously the yellow ball.
I was hoping you wouldn't mention that. Yeah, I mean, that was like the follow-up to Snooker Loopy, which I kind of appeared very briefly in the video of that when Barry Hearn, you know, was talking about how he's got the rest of them signed up. There's in that video I'm seen being handed a contract by Barry, and then he said, "We're doing a follow-up and you're in it, Fouldsy." I mean, you know, follow-ups to novelty records, not a good thing. I think it peaked something like 90 or something. But we had a good time with it. You know, we were at the Hippodrome and we did some a video there and met a lot of great people. But yeah, I mean, Chaz and Dave were great, but the record was not very good, was it? Let's be honest.
Roll baller, Alonzo ball for Buzz Balls, ready to go cocktails, take 12. Buzzballs just dropped their biggest blue balls.
Script says Biggie's blue balls, Lonzo. Take 13.
Blue balls just dropped their biggest buzzballs. Ugh.
Let's try a vocal exercise.
Buzzballs, Biggie's, blue balls, buzzballs, Biggie's, blue balls.
Big balls just dropped. Get blue balls this season with Buzzballs.
Please drink responsibly. Buzzballs available in spirit, wine, and malt. 15% alcohol by volume. Buzzballs, LLC, Carrollton, Texas.
There's a good chance you're dealing with a middleman, like me, when you get your medicines. That's because PBMs and insurers are often the same company. We even own big chain pharmacies and are buying your doctor's office. We decide what medicines you can get, where you get them, and how much you pay. It's a win-win. For me.
When middlemen own it all, you lose. Visit phrma.org/middlemen to learn more. Paid for by Pharma.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Upgrade your business with Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet. Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning fewer carts going abandoned and more sales going cha-ching. So if you're into growing your business, get a commerce platform that's ready to sell wherever your customers are. Visit Shopify.com to upgrade your selling today.
You then retired in 2003 at 39. Why did you retire so early?
Well, I'd already started doing a lot of commentary. I was also doing a lot of broadcasting for the bookmakers, and I worked in horse racing a little bit as well, in Ealing Studios, talking about horse racing, which is another great passion of mine. And I felt that at the time, approaching 40 appeared to be the end of your tether at snooker. Now, obviously, the class of 92, you've got 49-year-olds like John Higgins winning big tournaments, like the Tour Championship recently. And Ronnie they're nearly 50, and they're in the top 8 in the world, those three guys, but they're a little bit different. I felt I was losing my game. I was falling down the rankings a bit. There could have been a return to form for me, but I wasn't able to dedicate enough time to actual practice. I didn't really enjoy the practice. I think that's the problem when you get older. It's not only your game might deteriorate, do you really want to put in 5-6 hours a day, in the sunshine when you might be out having a game of cricket or having a game of golf or something, So the motivation is not there. So I felt that it would have been a good time to stop. If it had carried on, who knows? I might have found my form again, but I have no regrets on that score. I thought I got out of it at the right time, and luckily went straight into the commentary side of it, which is, perfect for me.
And you love doing that role?
Yeah, I've always been very grateful for that because, as I said earlier, I was a good player, never a great player, and I'd like to think I've never forgotten how difficult the game is to play. But I've enjoyed the commentary. I take it seriously. I think the good thing about being a commentator is you don't take that job home with you. When you're playing, you're worrying about your game, your technique. If you lose, you mightn't be in the best form as a human being to be around. But as far as the commentary is concerned, you could have a brilliant match, a not very good match, put the microphone down, and that's the job done. You don't take those emotions away with you when you're commentating. You care about the matches, but not in the same way you have to care about when you're playing.
In a sporting sense, it must be hard then when a player gets 100 break, you go next frame, you make a mistake, and they go, and you're sitting there for half an hour, probably hardly potting the ball. Then you make a mistake.
Well, that's the problem with snooker, isn't it? It's one of these games that you make a mistake, you sit and watch, which gives you a lot of time to think, not always the most positive thoughts. If your opponent make back-to-back centuries and they're not the quickest of players, as you say, you can be sort of half an hour sitting there staring into space, hoping they'll make an error, and it doesn't necessarily inspire you to go out and have confidence, really. It's that kind of a game. With most other sports, you play a bad shot, you're soon back at the oche or back on the golf course playing another shot. With snooker, you are literally sitting out for a period of time, which can be a long one, and it can be demoralising. But the other side of it is when you're at the table, your opponent could be anyone sitting in that chair. There's not much they can do.
Is that why you can get these big momentum shifts where someone could win 5 or 6 frames just like that?
I think so, and I think that also you get these intermittent breaks after 4 frames at snooker, and you can get players that are completely in a trance and they look like they're never going to miss a ball. But then you get that little bit of a spell away, and then you kind of start on an equal again. And sometimes a player that's been playing out of their minds so well. They lose that form. Really, they get taken out of their bubble. Snooker is a game where you can get into a zone sometimes where you just don't think you're going to miss a ball, but it doesn't take a lot to bring you out of that sort of state of mind, and then you come back down to earth.
A few early mornings, though, if you're doing the Chinese tournament.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Recently, especially, we did we worked from the UK. I'll give you an example. We've been doing it for years, but this season we worked in the UK on the tournament, the World Open, which was on air 6 a.m. So we're working in London, and we're sort of being over in the studio about 4:30, 4:45. And the next week it was even earlier, 5 a.m. start. So basically, you're kind of living off of Chinese time when you're not in China or in Hong Kong. You're just sitting over here. So yeah, sort of arriving in the studio at 3:30 in the morning. But what we're doing is not coal mining, is it? So I never lose sight of the fact that I'm very lucky to be doing it.
Is that the main difference with snooker today? There's so many players and are playing more around the world.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very global sport now. I mean, snooker, when I was with Barry, we went to China to play. It was the first ever visit in the 80s there. And the standard was very, very poor in China. I'll give you an example, actually. I remember on the first night, my great late friend Terry Griffiths was playing in the opening match against one of the local wildcard players. So we're kind of thinking, okay, let's see what Chinese snooker is like at this stage. So the guy broke off and missed the reds altogether, which I haven't seen anyone do since then, I don't think. He was just not a good player. But within 2 or 3 years of going back there, the wildcards had improved. I think one of the wildcards actually beat Jimmy White a couple of years later. So, the early sort of toe in the water in places like China and Thailand was during the 80s. And, all these years on, the game is huge. There's 5 Chinese events a season. They've got players in the top flight now. There's always been like players from Thailand there's been 5 or 6 play at the Crucible. And accordingly, there's tournaments in parts of the world where snooker was never very popular if you go back 30, 40 years. The year that Dennis won that world title, there wasn't really a lot of snooker overseas.
Lots of travelling for players, though, now.
Lots of travelling for players. And, look, I think most of the players love their job, but that's not to say that, being, in different time zones all the time and going to China and then coming back to the UK for a week after a long flight, then going back to Asia the week after, which is what was happening a couple of years ago, doesn't drain players and take the fun out of it. I think it does at times. Sometimes I don't know whether they're coming or going. But again, it's a job and they can pick and choose their events. So that I think nowadays there's so much snooker going on that the top players need to just pick and choose, miss out on the odd one, maybe stay over in parts of Europe or parts of Asia and miss out on tournaments back in the UK just so that they can be settled for a while. But of course, with their families, it's a big gulf, really. It's quite a big sort of sacrifice to make, really.
Do you think the World Championship one day will move from Sheffield to China?
Well, there's a lot of talk about that, isn't there? I mean, every World Championship, this argument comes up again. I know it's secure at the Crucible, I think, until 2027. And you can be sure of one thing, during the World Championships, next time around, it will be the talk of whether the game is going to go overseas. There's talk of it going to Saudi. It comes down to money, of course. Do I think it'll go elsewhere? I think it probably will. Do I want it to? Absolutely not, because, the Crucible, it's a hot ticket. It holds less than 1,000 people. It's always a pulsating atmosphere for every session. If you take snooker to a different country with this huge stadium where you never fill it up, you're going to be playing in front of a lot of empty seats, really. And there's nothing quite like Sheffield around the time of the World Championships for me. The whole city is buzzing, and I would love to think it will stay there, but I fear that at some point it will move.
This year's event begins on Saturday, the 19th of April.
Yeah, during Easter, yeah.
Yeah. Who's your winner for 2025?
Well, I mean, if you go by the form book, you'd be looking at Mark Selby, you'd be looking at Kyron Wilson, who's played a great year, but of course he's got to break the Crucible curse that I was speaking about earlier, or Judd Trump. But I've got a funny feeling that sometimes a player who's been a bit quiet will have a chance. I think Mark Allen has been conspicuously quiet this season, and last year it took, like John Higgins, an amazing clearance to knock him out. He could have been the champion last year. So I'm going to say that someone who's been, not travelling all around the world, not winning a load of matches, Mark Allen might win his first world title. But there's a lot of people on that shortlist this year.
And putting you on the spot after so many years in snooker, who's the best player you've seen?
Well, I mean, it has to be O'Sullivan. It really has to. I never thought, growing up, I always thought Steve Davis, no one was better than him. And then Stephen Hendry came along and he was clearly better. And I thought, well, this is it now. We've reached our peak. There's no one ever going to be like Hendry, who, of course, won 7 world titles, dominated the game completely. And then when Ronnie came along, he had this magic. He beat Hendry in a final of the UK age 17 in 93. And at that point, I didn't know if he was the best. But the fact that, he's the youngest and the oldest winner of the UK Championships, he's the oldest winner of the World Championships. It's incredible what he's achieved, the longevity of the man. Maybe he's coming to the end of his career now, I'm not sure. But O'Sullivan is a snooker phenomenon, No question about that.
A brief change of direction. I found out off air that you're a big cricket and horse racing fan.
Very much so. Yeah, I did some work in horse racing. I mean, I love horse racing. I ventured to make it to every racetrack in the country in 2015, but I came unstuck. And the reason I did, I missed the last Cartmel Bank Holiday Monday of the season because I'd never been there. I wanted to go to Cartmel because it was the last day of the England-India Test match at Lord's. So the two worlds came together. I chose Lord's. So I missed out on a few of the racetracks I've not been to. I still haven't been to a place like Redcar, and I went to Foss Lass recently, which is one of those ones I ticked off. A couple of the Scottish tracks I hadn't been, but once I never went to the last Cartmel meeting, I couldn't go to them all. I'm a massive racing fan, mostly jump racing, but I love it all. And as far as cricket's been my life, really. I love cricket as much as anything. I spent all my life enjoying cricket. I got into it in 1977, especially the year that boycott was recalled for the Ashes halfway through that series.
Yeah, because you're about my age, actually. So are we going to win the Ashes back in the winter?
Well, I mean, our bowlers are going to have to stay fit, aren't they? And I think there's obviously some doubts about that. Nothing would make me happier for us to win the Ashes back. I suppose, yeah, I feel that we've got some kind of a chance, but we've got to take 20 wickets, and we've also got to occupy the crease. You think when we won it in 2011, 2012, what we did, the way we batted long, the runs that Cook got, and Strauss got, and Trott at 3, we batted long, and we ground their bowlers into the dirt, which I don't think we're going to try and even do that, in this day and age.
Finally, Neal, how do you look back now on what's called the golden age of snooker?
Well, I feel lucky to have been a part of it. I was a bit part player. I was a good player, but I was a bit part player in the sort of like soap opera that was snooker, really. There was, you had your Steve Davis, who was the clean-cut player. There was Alex Higgins, who was either your best friend or your worst enemy, really. And I was very lucky to be involved in that. And as I say, it's only when you think about it now, the amount of people that come up and want to talk to you about that era, and they say, well, I don't watch snooker as much these days, which I think is a great shame. So I think the game now is fascinating and I love it just as much. But it was an era where, as I say, people were captivated by snooker. They become obsessed by it. It was front page news, and it was, on the news at 6 o'clock who'd won the matches and stuff. It's incredible. So I feel very lucky and privileged to have played some sort of a part in it.
We mustn't forget you won Pot Black in 1992.
I did. I played in junior Pot Black, actually. That was the first year we had that, where all the junior players. I met John Parrott in that, and one or two others that were coming through. Dino Kane, who we lost recently, sadly. So, yeah, I did win Pot Black. So that little trophy stood very proudly on my mantelpiece for a year.
Because that was the tournament that really sort of colour television got people into snooker a lot, didn't it?
Well, it was a half-an-hour program on a Thursday evening, I think it was, and it was all recorded in a couple of days. It was obviously kept very secretive as to who won that event, but you kind of, if you're in the game, they would sort of tell you, Graham Mars's won it this year. And I do remember one year, this shows you how the standard of snooker has gone on from back then. They said, you don't want to miss next Thursday's edition because you're going to see a century break. And it was Eddie Charlton made a break of 110. And centuries back then were extremely rare. So you just was never going to miss that program on that Thursday night where to watch somebody make a century break. And now you see, you get over 100 in the World Championship some years. The game has moved on, but people forget there were some very, very good players back then, but there just weren't as many as there are now.
I'm surprised Eddie Charlton got the 100 break in the 30 minutes for the program.
Yeah, I don't think there was a lot of time left over for chats.
Well, thank you very much, Neal, for sharing your What Was It Like To moment.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
You can save up to $850 at Mattress Warehouse right now. And trust us when we say that'll go a long way. Visit mattresswarehouse.com.